So a very warm welcome to the post-lunch session. We have an industrials panel, the trailblazers, as we say, in space technology and research. So from Nigeria, Philippines, Brazil, Taiwan, and Portugal, and I guess we are already running late. So I'm going to straight away move on to the speakers. The first speaker, may I invite Francis Chizea, who's the Director, National Space Research and Development Agency from Nigeria, to begin, and then we'll go as they're listed in order.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the ORF for inviting us to this very wonderful dialogue. We're having a very good time since yesterday, and I hope we're able to stimulate the audience on what's happening in the third world country, most especially emerging space countries in the world. I'm Francis Chizea. I'm the director in charge of policy and research at the agency. We're talking about emerging space nations here, so I'll probably like to give you a brief historical. I'll try to be quick. I know we don't have so much time, but I'll try to run through. I'll be available throughout the day to answer more questions from whoever is available or needs some clarification on what I'm going to present. I'll give an historical perspective of the Nigerian space program. Nigerians' intention to invest in space was declared in 1976. And in 1988, the National Council for Ministers approved the establishment of the National Remote Sensing Center. That is to say, at that point in time, the major focus of the Nigerian space program was on remote sensing only. The Remote Sensing Center took off in 1995. I'm going to explain why some of these delays and why most of this action didn't take place in the course of the presentation. And in 1999, 4 years later, in relation to the fact that we require a very holistic space program, the National Space Research and Development Agency, which is the National Space Agency for the country, was established with a very clear mandate for government. That is, to vigorously pursue the attainment of space technology or capabilities as an essential tool for the socio-economic development and the enhancement of the quality of the life of Nigerians. So in other words, the major focus of our space program is for social economic development and enhancement of living qualities of our people. In other words, the space program should be able to enhance the following sectors: talking of power, education, security, communication, agriculture, manufacturing, health, finance, transportation, and probably interagency cooperation within the system. In order to achieve this clear mandate and to be able to ensure that we're in line to providing what the government had asked us to provide, we put up a space policy in 2001 and was approved by government. The part of the space policy included the establishment of the National Space Council. The National Space Council is chaired by the President and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces himself. We have notable members of cabinet as members of the Space Council. So we get approvals for our program from the highest level in Nigeria. Also, we had the Technical Advisory Committee that was approved alongside the policy. The Technical Advisory Committee is composed of renowned scientists and engineers in various fields of space science and technology that advises the agency on the programs and the way to go about the programs in order to achieve the main mandate of our space objective. Then we have the International Cooperation Committee. The committee, of course, understand the fact that we coming into the race a bit late. We are not expected to reinvent the wheel completely, but be able to identify friendly countries or friendly neighbors that are able to partner with us towards our achieving the goals of our space policy. Now, the policy also established 6 operational centers. These are centers that had to carry out research and development in specific areas. There were 6 in number, 1 for education, 1 for basic space science and astronomy, 1 for space transport and propulsion, 1 for satellite technology development, and 1 for remote sensing, the one that was in existence before the Space Agency was established, and then a center for space geodesy and geodynamics. And in 2010, a law was signed establishing the agency. The thrust of Nigerian space policy is 1, development of the human resources and capacity in space science, natural resources management, defense, security, law enforcement, study of the Earth and its environment, space communication and applications, education, training, and promotion of international cooperation. Now, the objective of the policy is to develop 5 major areas. That is basic space science and technology, remote sensing, satellite meteorology, information and communication technology, and defense and security. Now, in order to carry out this program, we need to bring out a strategy in which we need to follow to ensure we're able to achieve the goals and set out objectives of the policy. We got government in 2005 to approve a 25-year roadmap. The roadmap is in 3 phases. Phase 1 was to span between 2005 to 2013. Phase 2, 2014 to 2022. And phase 3, 2023 to 2030. Right now, from what you see out there, we should expect to be on our phase 2 of the implementation of the 5-year roadmap. Now, the main objective, the 3 main goals of the roadmap, 1 is to produce a Nigerian astronaut. Yeah, it's a very big ambition. You want to produce a Nigerian astronaut. Why? It's not for tourism's sake. We have unique requirements in Africa. We have unique requirements in West Africa, where we're located, and we have unique requirements in Nigeria. We want an astronaut that will be able to go out to space to carry out basic research that concerns Nigeria, that will have direct impact on the people itself. Nobody else will do it for you. You have to do it yourself. For example, India will not be interested in doing research on cassava. Cassava is a major root crop in Nigeria. We want to get better species, be able to carry out research using this platform to be able to do that. Now, the next one is to launch a satellite manufactured in Nigeria. We need to be able to build our own satellites. But with time, of course, we want to be able to have a made-in-Nigerian satellite. The next one is to build and launch a Nigerian-made satellite from a launch site in Nigeria on a launch vehicle made in Nigeria. Yes, it's a 25 years plan, and I'll show you along the line how far we've gone and the problems we're facing. Now, I just thought about, I'll just say a few things about some of the satellite programs we've had. We've been able to launch 3 Earth observation satellites since the establishment of the Space Agency. The first one was the Nigerian Sat-1. It was launched in 2003, though Nigerian Sat-1 had been decommissioned in 2011 after spending 7 years in orbit. The Nigerian Sat-X and the Nigerian Sat-2. The Nigerian Sat-X was a product of the know-how technology training, which 25 of our engineers went through at Surrey Satellite Technology Limited in UK. We, at the initial, was trying to use the means for our engineers to do hands-on, to be able to get the hands-on in preparation for building satellites back home in Nigeria. Along the line, we decided to ensure that the satellite being built is not just a training model, but also a flight model. We were like, if we can fly it for a month or 2 months, it kind of builds the confidence of our engineers and scientists that we'll be able to do such or repeat such fate back home in Nigeria. I'm pleased to tell you that Nigerian Sat-X is flying in orbit and providing very good images for Earth observation today. Now, just show the photo of our ground station and some of our engineers at work in Abuja, where our satellite is located. Nigeria also has 1 communication satellite in orbit. The first one was launched in 2007, but was deorbited, because there was a failure with the deployment of the solar panels. A replacement was launched in 2011, and was fully commissioned in 2012. The major aim of having a telecommunications satellite, like we all know, the major money spinner within the space business today seems or still stands at the telecommunication product. Thus, with the main expected contribution to the national economy as retaining over $300 million annually have been spent by Nigeria on telecommunications services and help improve our GDP. Reduce tariffs on GSM and phone services. I think we have one of the highest call rates in the world, especially Nigeria and Africa as a whole. The call rates are huge. Calling local and international calls are very expensive. We've also reduced tariff on satellite television, broadcasting services. Most everybody wants to watch direct-to-home TV today, so a lot of people will need satellite services to be able to have this for them. And also promote e-commerce and e-governance in the country. Now, as an emerging space actor, I kind of deviate a bit from Nigeria, and I'm going to look at a whole lot of things as emerging space actors and Africa as a whole. That is the region which we're coming out from. Well, there's some common attributes of the emerging space actors. One, the emerging space actor realized late of the role of space science and technology in socio-economic development. Late realization of that, that's why they're just emerging now. There are increased reliance on space for socio-economic development in every society, for health, for banking, for navigation. We use it every day now. The requirement to have space technology within your system had never been at the highest level ever anywhere in the world today. So emerging space nations now realize they must be part of players in this game. And that is one of the reasons why we're beginning to see a lot of more and more nations declaring and investing in space. Now, most of the emerging space nations are located in Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. I know a few of them are from within the Asian region, but most of them are within this region. Most actors, or most new actors in these fields have very low GDPs. At least more than 80% of them have very low GDPs. And one very unique thing about them, most of them, not all, but most of them are located within the equatorial region. That's how God has put it there, but most of the emerging space actors are within the equatorial orbit. Now, what are the issues for emerging space actors? These, I'm going to be very specific on Africa, and I'm not going to be talking about Latin America too much here. Space requires huge investments. And the major players, especially in Africa today, is government. Only, I think, just one country, I know the private sector, that is South Africa, has a bit of private sector involvement within the space sector. But the major investor in space in Africa and in Nigeria as a whole is government, which means that your programs are controlled by policymakers. And it depends on who is on top at that point in time and how they support the programs you're carrying out. And that does affect the way the space program or the space initiatives are carried out. One, we still have to go for budgeting. There's no special fund allocated to space or space science research. So each year you have to go defend your budgets in as much as we have a 25-year roadmap that was approved by government. Well, you have a new government that doesn't want to carry out approvals that was given for the 25-year roadmap. So you have to go to budget every year. So it depends on who is there, who is on top, and the politics behind it. Now, this, of course, had not been, well, I've said it, private sector participation is very limited. Only very few private sector participation, development of space within the emerging space actors. Now, one of the issues, like I said, international cooperation, it might sound a bit very, very ambiguous, international cooperation, thought of bilateral cooperation. Yes, the resources are limited. I need to cooperate with my colleagues, for example, in Africa, and I'm able to get some programs of interest with another country, and in a few months, there's a change of government, that program ceases to exist, and that's the problem. You could start invested in that, and I'll give an example of the multilateral, which is the ARMC. I don't know who have heard about the ARMC constellation. It's supposed to be African Resource Management Constellation. It's supposed to be a constellation of 5 satellites to monitor Africa, for Africa. And today, out of the expected 5 satellites within the constellation, only 1 is in orbit. And out of the remaining 4 that we're expecting, right now, none of them have even started the build of the satellite. And the first satellite within this constellation has already spent 6 years in orbit. And we're expecting to deorbit or to stop operations on this satellite within the next 2 years. So that's a major problem within the African region. Regional cooperation. Well, I'm sure if you're current, you know we have an African space policy and strategy in place. Now, how do we implement it? What are the strategies for implementing such a policy? 2 minutes. How do you implement such a policy within Africa? We have the African Union anchoring such a program within the African continent. But you find out the African Union, which is being funded by African states, providing funds to the Commission via, according to their GDPs. Most of the African countries are not even paying their subscription. So how do they fund a space agency for Africa? Number 2, political issues. We have some countries that have restrictions from public-friendly partners we're expecting. How are you able to work with them as Africans and be able to also link with the rest of the world? That's a major problem. International regulations. Most of the laws that made treaties were there before most emerging space nations decided to join space. Of course, most of the assets have been shared before they got there. Now, to put up a satellite in orbit is a big problem. For example, telecommunication satellites. All the major providers of telecommunication services in Nigeria are European companies because the Africans, the orbital slots have been seeded away before now. And when we launched our communication satellite, we had to go 45 degrees east. That's the only available slot for us to be able to put our satellite out there. So this is also causing a major problem and is limiting the access of most emerging space stations to the orbit. I remember the comment by Lieutenant General Sharma yesterday. Space should be for everybody. But for emerging space nation, that's a major problem we're having today. And then, okay, I'll go to the next slide. Now, I was going to talk about a roadmap. There's a timeline on it. I'll just do that in 30 seconds. We are supposed to do within 25 years. And based on the chart I have there now, we should have developed our made in Nigerian satellite by now, but that is still ongoing. We're supposed to achieve that this year, but I don't see that coming into play till probably in 2 years' time. Hopefully, that our budget continues to come as we expect it for the next 2 years, because the facilities to put this together are not in place. So everything from 2018 upwards are a bit truncated. The timing has changed, so we'll have to review the policy once more. We'll have to review the roadmap once more. I'll stop now. I've been asked to stop. I have no much time. Thank you for your attention. I will be available for more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for very nicely outlining the developmental issues regarding space program as far as Nigeria is concerned. Also outlining opportunities and challenge. And I have a couple of questions, but I hold them for later. May I now move to Rogel Sese, Program Leader, National Space Development Program, Philippines Department of Science and Technology. So again, you have 10 to 12 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll be mindful of the time. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ORF for this opportunity to present to this esteemed audience about the Philippine Space Program. I think among the panelists, we are one of the youngest because our space agency is still under establishment, but we are working for the past few years. There has been a lot of significant changes and developments that has enabled us to rapidly progress in a very short amount of time. So can we put up the PowerPoint? Thank you. So I work under the National Space Development Program, which is a project under the Department of Science and Technology, which for us, we serve as the interim space policy office and the space agency in the absence of a formal one. Oh, sorry. And for the past few years, right now we're in transition from the phase 1 of NSDP to the second phase, which is scheduled to start within I think by April or by May this year. Okay. Just an overview of the Philippines, in case some of you don't know where we are. So we're an archipelagic nation and in the Southeast Asia. So we have a population of about 105 million and land area of 300,000 square kilometers, roughly a little bit less than 10% of India. And being in Southeast Asia, we are the first line of defense coming from the Pacific when it comes to typhoons. So we have about 20 typhoons every year, and also being in Southeast Asia, we are in the Pacific Ring of Fire, which makes us a smorgasbord of disaster every year. We're number three country in terms of the most exposed in terms of natural risk and hazards. So disaster assessment and management plays a very crucial role in the Philippine lifestyle. Although the space development program has started only a few years ago, we have done a lot of activities since the early, even way up to the early 1800s. And in even in the 1970s, we had our own rocket development program, which unfortunately was stalled. We were a member of COPOS since 1977. We had our first telecom satellite in 1997. At the same time, we are participating in the Sentinel Asia, which is a disaster monitoring program led by JAXA. And we have signed 3 international space treaties, although we didn't ratify them. We signed the Outer Space Treaty, the Rescue Agreement, and the Liability Convention. And I don't know how it happened, but we are one of the few countries that ratified the Moon Treaty. So we're still looking into why that happened and why. Okay. In retrospect, the reason why we placed the turning point at 2012-2013 is because of 2 very important events. The first one is military in nature. The second one is civilian in nature, which shows us inherently the dual nature use of space. So the first point was an incident in the South China Sea, where in one of the territories of the Philippines known as Scarborough Shoal, we lost control of this due to a botched agreement between China and the US. And in 2013, we experienced one of the strongest typhoons that ever hit landfall, which is Typhoon Haiyan. So these 2 events, in retrospect, was the turning point on why the Philippines suddenly ramped up its capability in terms of space. First, because we lacked the capability to monitor what is happening in the South China Sea, because of the lack of space asset. And the second is when disaster is as widespread and as large as what we experienced in Typhoon Haiyan, we had towns and provinces cut off from communications for a week or 2. And the only way that we can communicate with them was through satellite communication. So currently the Philippines is considered to be one of an emerging space nation. And in 2016, we had although we had our biggest year in 2016, since 2013, we've been doing a lot of activities. We've conducted numerous researches on the baseline. We had a baseline research for space activities and infrastructure and what we currently have in terms of manpower and infrastructure. In 2014, we crafted our own space policy, which came from an analysis of foreign space programs and policies. We did a multi-sectoral stakeholder consultation with industry, defense, academia and government agencies on how the space policy should be crafted, so we involve as many people as possible who can benefit from space. We also had our first collaboration with our foreign partner, which is Japan. We collaborated with Tohoku and Hokkaido University on the creation of the first microsatellite of the Philippines. And in the National Space Development Program, we wrote the cost-benefit analysis of having a space program. We established the key development roadmaps, and we started to promote international cooperations and partnership. And in 2016, with the turn of the new administration under President Duterte, we started lobbying for the legislation of the Philippine Space Agency and policy. So 2016 was a very big year for the Philippines. We had 3 major events. The first was the launch of the microsatellite, which we call Diwata-1. So this is an optical satellite. We skipped the nanosatellite CubeSat phase and proceeded directly to microsatellite. So to date, I think this is one of the largest microsatellite that has been launched from the ISS. So it's a 50-kilogram optical satellite with 4 camera payloads. And as of now, it's still operating, and we're still receiving images and through our ground control station that is located in Manila. We also pushed for the legislation of the Philippine Space Agency both in Congress and in Senate. And in November of 2016, we hosted the 23rd Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum. One of the biggest ironies is we're hosting a space agency forum, even if we don't have a space agency yet. So going to the space policy, so as a result of the consultation with various sectors, we drafted this policy which would serve as a primary strategic roadmap for space development for the next decade. We identified 6 key development areas, namely national security and development, hazard management and climate studies, space research and development, space education, space industry capacity building, space education and awareness, and international cooperation. So you can see here the different key statements for each of the KDA. I won't go through them one by one in the interest of time, but it shows you how the first 2 is the most important for us right now, which is national security and development, and also for hazard management and climate studies. So as I mentioned earlier, the National Space Development Program, we serve as the interim program funded under the Department of Science and Technology. So our task is to lay the groundwork and the necessary infrastructure so that by the time the legislation for the space agency comes in, it's just a matter of changing the name or the label in the door. But in terms of function, we are starting to work as a coordinating agency and also a strategic policy making body for the space program. We drafted several roadmaps, namely the National Space Research and Development Agenda, the Satellite Development Roadmap, which outlines the different satellites that is going to be needed by the country for the next 10 years. We have even crafted our own national satellite data sharing and management policy, and even the Space Industry Development Roadmap, wherein we identified our niche areas to be more on space subsystems production, AIT facilities, space applications, and even launch services. In terms of the legislating a space agency, right now we have 4 bills in Congress and 3 bills in Senate that is lodged, and it's currently under the final deliberation in the Congress. In terms of the number of congressmen, I think we already now up to around 25 congressmen who are supporting the bill, which is a surprising thing for us because we were expecting to fight a battle with them to make them understand the value of space, but surprisingly they understood the value of it, and it was a relatively easy battle. And one of their biggest comment was the funding that we were requesting was very small. So they would make it. So that's always a welcome problem to have. They want to give us more money, which is good. We also managed to put the space program in 3 very important national documents. The most important of all is the Philippine Development Plan for 2017 to 2022. So this serves as the blueprint or the framework for the current administration, and it's stated in Chapter 14 of the PDP that the Philippines will create its own space agency and develop its own space program. It's even included in the National Security Policy for 2017 to 2022, as well as in the Harmonized National Research and Development Agenda of the Department of Science and Technology. And right now we're working on having it as considered as a priority legislation under the Legislative Development Advisory Council, or what we call LEDAC. As a result of our rapid progress, we drafted this some sort of like recommendation for other emerging space nations and how it can be done in a very short amount of time. So of course, first of all, we need to know where we are in terms of assets, infrastructure. You have to analyze the space policy and see which ones are most suitable to your own country. The way we did it is we didn't copy exactly what other countries have done, but we tried to see which ones will work given our political situation and the way our government works. We involved as many various agencies and sectors in the early stages. Even in the very early stages of drafting the policy, they were already involved, so that by the time it was already presented in Congress, everyone is agreeing that this is going to happen, this is what we're going to do, and so on, which lessens the resistance. We had a very small, dedicated team to do a lot of the legwork. To be honest, the space policy was drafted only in 4 months by a group of 4 people. It was just me and 3 of my assistants who drafted the space policy. So that's a very difficult work, but that's the only way we can get things done in a very rapid manner. Otherwise, we'll be always bogged down by bureaucracy. We also want to have a long-term perspective on space development, but we have to take into account the short-term political realities. We have to adjust to the changing times. One example of this is we had everything ready by 2015, but because we knew that an national presidential election is going to happen in 2016, we held everything off until the new administration came in. So that's one of the strategies that we did. We are educating the politicians, the decision makers, to make them understand. I think this burden is much more on the side of the scientists, because who understands this space, because it's easier for scientists to go to understand politicians than politicians understanding scientists. And I think that's the same everywhere. We flew very much under the radar for the first 3 years. No one knew that we were even existing. Very few agencies knew that we were existing, which enabled us to have some sort of maneuverability. And it's only in 2016 that we started to promote ourselves, that the Philippines is going to have a space program. We had a huge publicity about it, and right now, more or less, everyone knew that it's going to happen. We are cooperating with foreign spacefaring nations and also in other emerging space nations. We're exploring North-South and South-South cooperations. And I think the biggest takeaway from the experience of the Philippines is that even at the very early stages, we included space law, space policy, and space security. We were not focused only on the technology aspect of space development, but including even these frameworks, which in the long run would be very beneficial. So just last few slides. So some future developments that we are looking into, of course, we're ramping up our human resources capacity building. By the end of the year, we will be launching Diwata 2, which is the second microsatellite that we are going to launch. And also, I think by April this year, we'll be launching our first CubeSat, which was developed by the Philippines together with Kyushu Institute of Technology. We are developing various applications for agriculture, environment, and maritime security, because these are the critical areas that we saw that is very important for our country. We are increasing our public awareness, so we have our own communication strategy on how to make the public aware about the benefits of space, because coming from a developing nation, sometimes it's very hard to convince the public to support a space program, because the viewpoint is that it's a waste of time, it's a waste of resources, and it's a way of corrupting money from the government. But we try to see that that's not the case, or we try to show them that's not the case. As I said, hopefully within the year, we expect this Philippine Space Agency to be created. Otherwise, our target is to have it by August, September of this year. Otherwise, the earliest projection that we're going to have is by second half of 2019, if it doesn't happen this year. We're also looking at the ratification of space treaties, primarily the Outer Space Treaty, and establishing new cooperations. We're working now on MOU with UK, because we're getting about 10% share from one of the Novasar satellite. And of course, in the end, we want to be a responsible space actor, to which we're trying to be more active and probably lead the ASEAN in terms of the creation of a regional space agency. And of course, in even international scene, like COPUOS, ratifying the space treaties, and even the MTCR. So the way that the Philippines has progressed in the past few years is two-phase. The first phase, we were doing mostly everything alone, which enabled us to do everything a lot in a very rapid pace. But now we're slowly trying to shift from that perspective to a more cooperative agreement, so that we can be more sustainable in the long run. And to quote an African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, you have to go together. And I think that is something that emerging space nation should take into consideration, that you can do only so much by yourself, but at some point you have to cooperate, not just with established spacefaring nations, but even for other emerging space nations in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rogel, for outlining very nicely also the importance of cooperation. Government's ready to give more money rather than less. It's quite a revelation. It also shows the importance attached to the space program in terms of overall development. So the third speaker that we have here with us is Rodrigo Leonardi, who's the Deputy Director of Satellites, Application and Development, Brazilian Space Agency. So over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here today at this event of the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you for the invitation. I'm also very happy to be here to engage in a dialogue about space policy with so many colleagues from India and from around the world. I am Rodrigo Leonardi. I work at the Brazilian Space Agency. And for this session, I will address the three topics of the session and tell you about what the basis of our space program in Brazil. I'll say a few words about some of the initiatives we are executing these days. And of course, I will say a few words about what is our view and framework for engaging in international cooperation. Okay, let's start with the first topic, the basis for the Brazilian space program. Actually, you can track down to the 80s our first initiative to have a space Brazilian mission. But our policy was actually only issued in 1994. It's a government document called the Brazilian Development Policy for Space Activities. It has changed very little since then. And it was the same year we created our space agency. So it's a 24 years old agency. And if you go to the document, you're going to see that the core idea of this policy is to promote the use of space systems for addressing national needs and for the benefit of Brazilian society in accordance with our own criteria and convenience. That's the basic idea of the policy. And it's a long document, but basically it lays down some guidelines for our program. And here I have just the most, let's say, relevant ones. So priority, as I said, is to address national needs. For instance, a good case in point is monitoring the Amazon, which is basically half of our territory. Efforts, we believe that we should concentrate efforts in mobilizing programs where you can bring together several stakeholders of your society, right? We also scope how much we go into the mission depends on what's the final result you get. What are you delivering as a product at the end of the day? Of course, we don't have a large budget, and human resources also a bottleneck. So, we have to do a critical analysis on how to invest our effort. And of course, we welcome industry in this enterprise. Here you have a picture of our integration facility. It's located in the city of São José dos Campos, nearby São Paulo. And you can see our vacuum thermal chamber, and there's a satellite, the Brazilian satellite, inside being tested. Very good. Let's talk now about the second topic, some of the initiatives we're doing in Brazil. Not going to give you a complete list. But basically, we have efforts on all the major segments of the space activity. So for the launch segment, we have a long tradition with sounding rockets. Here you see VSB-30 is just the latest evolution of our family of sounding rockets. It's capable of carrying a payload of up to 400 kilograms to space, and then you can run some scientific experiments in a microgravity environment. For the ground segment, we have basically two launch centers in Brazil, Alcântara being the most famous one. It's located northeast of Brazil, just 2 degrees south of equator. And it's, how to say it, underused, right? We're launching sounding rockets from there, but I know we aim to have larger rockets in the future, maybe some of them are from the international community. Still some dialogue we are having with several partners. And as probably you know, the reason that we have a complete base without a rocket, it was because in 2003, we had an accident there, an explosion. We lost 21 engineers that day, and we never fully recovered since then. Okay. Applications, we have also a lot of work going on with applications. Here you have just an example of monitoring the deforestation of the Amazon. You can see in the picture on your left a region that was actually seen for the first time with a satellite. Then you have, a team visiting the site and trying to do our best to contain these sort of illegal activities. We have all the data is public, everything is available for authorities, and it's a system that we put a lot of effort in make it useful. And for satellites, we have actually quite a few satellites already. First Brazilian satellite was launched in 1985. It was Brazilsat A1, telecommunication satellite. And since then, over the last 33 years, we have had, let's say, 38 Brazilian objects. If you look them by generic function, you're going to see in the pizza plot that basically half of them are telecommunication. Then we have a reasonable fraction that goes into remote sensing and also research and development, where all you want to do is get the technology you want to put together. And if you ask where do they come from, you're going to see that basically half of them are Brazilians. They are made in Brazil. They are our projects. You're going to see that there's a fraction, 37, that we just bought overseas, like a car. We buy a satellite, but we do operate the satellite. It's our satellite. It belongs to our infrastructure, right? And we also have a small fraction, but also important, that they are foreigner satellites, but they are operated according to Brazilian laws, and they have offices down there, and they are, they have an authorization to sell services in Brazil. So we collect taxes of the services. They are also part of our infrastructure. So in this sense, they are also Brazilian satellites, right? 20 of them are still in operation. 10 of them are no longer in operation, and 8 of them, they failed in launch or in operations. And now I'm going to just, something happened here. Now I'm going to just give you a flavor of some of these objects. We have a family of Earth remote sensing satellites that is a partnership with China. Basically, we built half of the satellite, we operated half of the time, and vice versa with China. First one was CBERS-1, launched in 1999, and since then we have launched 5 of them. CBERS-4 is still in operations, and we already have in the pipeline CBERS-4A. We're going to aim for launching next year. And here you see 2 pictures, and you see an evolution of Brazilian cameras. So the first one is you see details of the Brazilian coastline and São Paulo, Rio, the largest cities you can see there. And then you see below that one it's a hydroelectric dam in Brazil, and you can see how the quality and resolution of the Brazilian cameras have evolved during time. It's not the state of the art, but we are very proud that they are Brazilian hardware. We also have another one in the pipeline. It's called Amazonia. It's also, again, it's fully developed in Brazil. It's for deforestation monitoring of the Amazon rainforest. We aim for 2020. Let's see if we are capable of delivering this in time. And the latest one, it was just launched last year, May 2017, is the Geostationary Strategic Communication Satellite. It provides broadband and governmental communication for the entire Brazilian territory. So this is a classic example. We bought overseas, but it's our satellite. And we also have a technology transfer program going these days with Thales Alenia Space. Then let's talk about some opportunities and maybe challenges at the same time. We've been discussing in the BRICS framework, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the idea of having a BRICS sensing satellite constellation. Actually, this is a picture from an event we organized in Brasilia September last year, where we invited our potential partners to discuss further on this idea. And it's not, we don't have, it's still ongoing discussion, so we don't have a formal agreement yet, But it's, no, if you succeed in that, in that direction, we sometime soon we may have a project, a common project between Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. This morning in the security panel, and there was a lot of discussions about tensions, about what do we do, what we don't do, and somebody was saying that sooner or later we should try to find common ways to cooperate, right? Well, here's an opportunity to do something that there's no harm. If you succeed, will be a good example. As I said, it's still a challenge, it's still a very early stage of this idea, but we've been discussing on a regular way. And finally, for my last topic and last slide about, what can I say about treaties regulating our behavior? Well, we have signed the Outer Space Treaty in 1967. I would like here to take the opportunity to emphasize that Brazil believes that all countries, regardless the state of development, are entitled to explore outer space in conditions of equality in order to foster their development. And that, of course, space activities should be conducted with due regard for international peace and security. And the very last, we are open to international cooperation. If we can choose, we would at least try to follow these guidelines, trying to find a mission that is addressing common interest, something that we can and we would like to do together. We, of course, would like to share risk and cost. We believe that, by working together, you can establish strategic geopolitical partnerships. And finally, we are also always keen trying to find ways to get some technology transferred to our program. And with that, I'm concluding, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for also keeping very much within the time limit. May I request now the next speaker, Feng-Tai Hwang, who's at the Division of Systems Engineering, National Space Organization, NARLabs, MOST at Taiwan. Over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Feng-Tai Hwang. It is my honor to be invited to attend this meeting, and I'm very happy to share with you about space development in Taiwan, and potential space cooperation with India were also addressed in this talk. Okay, next. Okay. Okay, first of all, I will introduce you Taiwan Space Policy and organization. And I will describe space development in Taiwan in detail. After that, I will talk about the next Taiwan Space Development Plan and the potential Taiwan-India space cooperation. Finally, I will give a short conclusions. Okay. If you ask me what is a Taiwan space policy, I think no one can give you a clear answer, since we don't have official documents to declare Taiwan space policy. However, to build a self-reliant space technology is one of the targets for Taiwan space development. Right now, the major goal for Taiwan to develop space technology is try to establish Taiwan space industry. This slide shows the evolution of space organization. National Space Program Office, preparatory office, was established in 1991, which was under the Executive Yuan Directory, The executive yuan is the supreme administrative organization in Taiwan. In 2003, National Applied Research Laboratory was established, which integrated 11 national labs, including NSPO. In 2005, NSPO, National Space Program Office, changed her name into the National Space Organization. Now let me move to the space development in Taiwan. In Taiwan, we have already conducted two-phase space technology development long-term plan. In phase one, phase one was from 1991 to 2005. In this phase, we built up our own space facilities and launched the Formosat 1, Formosat 2, and the Formosat 3 successfully. Phase 2 was from 2004 to 2018. Unfortunately, in this phase, we faced a lot of difficulties. From this figure, you can see many space programs were terminated, were canceled due to political reasons. For example, Ka-band communication satellite program, Formosat 6 microsatellite program, small launcher program, and etc. Therefore, we only complete Formosat 5 and Formosat 7 in this phase. This slide shows another point of view of the space development in Taiwan. Cooperated with Singapore Telecommunication, Zhonghua Telecommunication of Taiwan launched two communication satellites in 1998 and 2011, respectively. On the other hand, NSPO launched Formosat 1, 2, 3, and 5 in 1999, 2004, 2006, and last year we launched the Formosat 5, and we will launch Formosat 7 this year. From this figure, we can see that only Formosat 5 was built by our own space technology, including remote sensing instrument. Other satellites were procured from foreign companies. Except for the institutional space development, more and more startup space companies were established in Taiwan recently. For example, TI Space, Trident Pacific, Odyssey, and etc. One thing I need to mention is that TI Space is a new startup space company which is trying to build the launch vehicle for small satellite. Okay, this slide shows the main space facility in Taiwan. We have one satellite operation and control center and a satellite integration test facility. And we also have 3 TT&C stations around Taiwan. Okay, this slide shows the Formosat 5 and the sounding rocket. And this slide shows the Formosat 5 image. This is San Francisco airport taken by Formosat 5. Okay, right now we are drafting Taiwan next phase space technology long-term plan. This long-term plan will from the next year to 2028. It will include 4 different space missions. First one is high-resolution optical remote sensing satellite constellation. The second mission is ultra-high-resolution optical remote sensing satellite constellation. The third one is environmental monitoring satellite constellation. And the last one, we also want to challenge the space exploration mission. except for the space exploration, we will build all of those satellites using domestic space technology. The goal for Taiwan's next phase space technology development long-term plan was listed here. I think the most important goals is to build, is to enhance in domestic space technology. And we hope we can establish Taiwan's space industry within next 10 years. Okay, let me move to the potential space cooperation between Taiwan and India. As I know, in fact, Taiwan and India already have a small-scale space cooperation in space technology. For example, Israel bought the CMOS image sensor from a Taiwanese company. Therefore, based on this foundation, I believe there will be more and more space cooperation between Taiwan and India in the future. For example, India may provide a launch service for Taiwan to launch Taiwan's satellite. And the NSPO and Israel may have cooperation for space exploration and so on. Conclusions. Okay. Taiwan has demonstrated her own capability to build a high-resolution remote sensing satellite and a sounding rocket using domestic technology. Based on the experience of Formosat 5, Taiwan will soon approve her next space technology development plan and speed up satellite development to meet the national needs. Finally, Taiwan and India share common interest values, and there will be more and more, there will be many different levels of cooperation in the field of space in the future. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Feng-Tai Hwang. Without wasting any more time, may I call upon Tiago Rebelo, who's head of Aerospace and Ocean Engineering at the Center of Engineering and Product Development. So over to you, Tiago.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my utmost pleasure to be here with you today. And first of all, I would like to thank the organization, the ORF, for the kind invitation, as well as the esteemed audience for your attention. So I belong to CEiiA, an engineering and product development center which is based in Portugal. And the first question is, why is Portugal represented in an emerging space actors panel? So we have been part of the European Space Agency for almost 2 decades now, so one would think that we are quite advanced in terms of our programs, and we have participated in most of the significant programs at ESA level, at the European Space Agency level. But at the national level, I could say and I can state that we are much less advanced than all these countries that came in before us. So we don't have a space agency, we don't have a proper defined policy. So it's the first time for many years that we are now starting to define that as a country. So our goal really is to come into the new space thinking about it as a network for opportunities. And with this mindset, there have been some policies coming in recent years. So the first one and more important is a modern space strategy for the country, thinking about 2030. So it's being called Portugal Space 2030. Together with this space strategy, which is the first time the country is thinking about space in a very organized fashion and thinking about its own interests at the country level, we are linking this strategy to a global pilot action in the Atlantic Ocean. So Portugal is that small rectangle over there, which sits in the Atlantic Ocean. And right now, it has one of the biggest economic exclusive trade zones in the world. And if its continental shelf extension, which was requested to the UN, gets approved, the country will have 97% of its territory as the Atlantic Ocean. So the Atlantic is something which has been, since ever, very important for us and the seas as a whole. So let me share with you a little bit about this space strategy and what does it encompass, as well as this pilot action, and finally I will finish by wrapping up what we have been doing at my institution in the recent years. So some context. As I said, Portugal got enrolled in the European Space Agency back in the year 2000, so almost 2 decades. We have right now over 100 national entities which represent the ecosystem of space entities in Portugal. Globally, the country has invested about 230 million euros in space programs, which came back to the industry worth a revenue, a turnover of around 890 million euros. So it was clear for the country, with the experience of these 2 decades, that space is a segment of high spillover, technological spillover and economical spillover. So coming to the new space, it was clear for the country that we needed to have our own strategy, that we needed to have perhaps our own access to space, or at least jointly build up capacity with other countries, and that we needed to have our strategy to not only be tier 2s or tier 3s at the European level, but also to have some representation at the products level, so the satellites level, let's say. So Portugal Space 2030 this strategy has been under consultation for some months now, public consultation. And just this week, it got approved at a National Council of Ministers back in Portugal. And it has 3 main pillars. One is focused on the markets. So it is clear for this strategy that one should immediately exploit the thousands of data which are already being generated by European satellites. And this means down-to-earth applications very much focused on the needs at the country level, either surveillance or monitoring, or just really understanding the ecosystems with a great focus on the ocean. The second one, which is more on the medium to long term, is the supply. And this means building the capacity to become a player at an international level. So far Portugal has been building, or the Portuguese industry has been building subsystems, or even not that, or just supplying engineering. So the idea is that through the development and demonstration of our own satellites, and here we are talking about small satellites, and by opening new areas of intervention, such as the small launchers, for example, one could in the future profit of this experience by getting integrator in the big players game, one can say it this way. And the third vector, which is critical for the country, is the skills. So it is clear for us that there has to be a continuous investment on building up capacity, and this means an investment in science, innovation, and definitely education at all levels. So to build up this strategy, there has been a framework which is being created. So first of all, there is no such thing as a space activities bill or a space law in Portugal. So this is something that has to be built, and which is currently being discussed with many countries around Europe, but also around the world. For example, the UK has been quite supportive on helping us doing this, the Luxembourg as well. So there have been discussions with many countries. The financial framework, it's quite important. So it is clear that if Portugal is moving forward with such a strategy, this will not be a 100% public investment. So when we are starting right now talking about having a Portuguese space agency, it is clear that it cannot be a typical space agency. It will have to be a private-public joint venture. So the institutional framework, so there is currently an alignment between all stakeholders, so the policymakers, the industry, the universities, and this is quite important to having a long-term strategy which is not dependent on which government is ruling at the short term. And then obviously the international environment. So it's clear for Portugal, which is actually a nation which has always been thinking at a worldwide level since the discovery's time, that this cannot be done alone. We are a small country. In Europe, we have only 10 million inhabitants, so we are very small compared to the scale of the world, so we have to do this in an international fashion together with many emerging actors. And then we have something unique, which we are trying to understand if we can exploit something out of it, which is the Azores. So the Azores are a beautiful archipelago of islands which sit in the mid-Atlantic, and which are quite a fantastic location to perhaps have a spaceport targeting new space applications. So It has about 1,500 kilometers of open ocean in all directions. It is part of European territory, so it's in the Schengen area. It is near the equator, so it is easy to get to space, and there are a bunch of infrastructures which have been sitting there for a long time. So the Portuguese government and the Portuguese agencies have been recently investing on understanding if it would be feasible or not to build such a spaceport in this location. And there have been a couple of studies which have already been published. The most recent one was just this week, actually yesterday, it was published back in Portugal. It was made by the University of Texas. And it was really a feasibility assessment on if this would be interesting from a technological point of view, but also from an economic point of view. There are a couple of studies being undertaken by the European Space Agency, and there are certainly some studies being undertaken by Portuguese entities, private and obviously public. So in the medium term, besides this space strategy, it is also our goal to really understand and study the technical feasibility of having such a spaceport. Would or not this be interesting for the new space industries? And this is something which is being discussed with many players, from private entities back in Europe like Airbus or OHB and many others, but also with big countries around the world like India and China. So they see this possibility as something which might be interesting for them as well. So it's something we definitely will pursue in the near future. So now, let's go to this global action that I was mentioning. So in parallel to really drafting this space strategy agenda for Portugal, there has been an action being put together over the last 2 years, which has had at least a dozen of workshops set all around the world, and which is called the Atlantic International Research Center. And the idea, it started with Portugal and mainly in the Azores as a unique environment for really exploring and exploiting the resources of the Atlantic from space to actually the deep sea. But it has easily been extended to many countries around the globe. And the idea was really to foster science through the establishment of an integrated governance program for the Atlantic in a sustainable manner, really trying to explore the Atlantic resources. So what has been done so far in this context? So an agenda for scientific cooperation, technology, and innovation has been set, and this is public. It's something that you can check online. And it has been set to strengthen the cooperation and the interconnections between North and South Atlantic to actually tackle some of biggest global societal challenges, such as understanding, for example, climate changes, or studying the ecosystem of the ocean, or atmospheric science. And doing this in a multidisciplinary manner, making use of space technology for Earth observation, but also making use of in situ observation with ocean technology, and really processing all these data to have meaningful results. So as I said, there have been more than a dozen of workshops on this, and 2 high-level dialogues between industry, policymakers, and science. The second dialogue, the first one was held in the Azores. The second dialogue was held in Florianopolis in Brazil last November. And actually in this event, there has been signed the agreement to actually bring to light this center. So 10 countries, 8 countries signed the agreement. 2 countries, South Africa and UK, have been signing it as observation countries. And the founding committee has been established, and there are already some actions across the both sides of the ocean, from Nigeria to South Africa to Brazil to Uruguay, Spain, Portugal. There are many countries involved in this initiative to really start acting in a networked fashion and start integrating different space programs, but not only. So coming to the end, just explaining you a little bit what is CEiiA and what do we do. So as I said, there is no such thing as a space agency in Portugal. There is a space office which is coordinated by our national funding agency. So within the scope of the national funding agency, the space office is something minor which has a few resources. So our Center of Engineering and Product Development acts like a strong arm towards action. So we are not university related, we are not an industry, we are a non-profit institution which actually tries to bridge the gap between these 2 realities in all the technology markets that Portugal has been investing in recent years. So from the automotive to aeronautics to ocean programs and more recently space, we have been trying to actually build the network of value and the network of players at the national level to really build up the needed value chain. So we are about 300 people right now. We are based in the north of Portugal, in Porto. And in our center, we can basically go from the idea to the testing, the prototyping. So we are quite a big institution for the Portuguese level, and we are certainly the biggest employer of aerospace engineers back in Portugal. So it makes all sense for us to participate in this new endeavor. Just giving you an examples of products and technologies that we have been evolving. As I said, we started in the automotive industry. We worked around electric vehicles for urban mobility context. We built up the value chain. We are currently, together with many Portuguese entities, running to try and industrialize that vehicle over there, which is B. We have worked with many major aircraft OEMs from Brazil with Embraer to Leonardi helicopters in the UK. And finally, we moved to oceans and space, and I will just, this is my final slide. I just want to spend a couple of minutes here explaining how are we moving forward with this new space context. So Portugal has had one satellite, which is called POSSAT-1, which was launched to space almost 3 decades ago. And it was, well, people say it was developed in Portugal, but it was actually integrated in Portugal. So it was acquired, and there was some technology transfer, but it stopped there, basically. There was no true involvement of the Portuguese industry. So just last year, the Portuguese industry, together with the research centers and the universities, got itself organized and built up a private-public venture to actually develop the first Portuguese microsatellite, which is called Infant, which is the satellite you see over there in that corner. So it's a satellite which is very much targeted towards ocean observation and communications. It's a small satellite, 40 centimeters by 20 by 20 in a low Earth orbit. And we hope to launch it back in the year 2020. And hopefully for us, we have been trying to build up the efforts to make it the first out of a constellation of 12 to 16 satellites. And we have been trying to pitch in many players from India to back in Europe to join us in this effort and to have back-to-back investment on this area. So we still have a long way to go, and I really just wanted to give you a full picture of where we are at in terms of technology as well as in terms of policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you all. Thank you to all panelists for taking us through the National Space Program in your respective country. Space, as they say, is the final frontier, but we have moved further away from just exploring or stargazing to now looking at space as a resource, right? So let me outline a couple of issues before I open the floor. I was just wondering, I think most of you highlighted very interestingly the developmental aspect of the space program in your respective country. But there is one very integral, and some of you did mention, but it didn't come across very importantly, is the strategic aspects of the space program, because that's integral to the space programs. And also, you can say the flip side of it, the surveillance technology that comes as an offshoot of the space program. So what it does to privacy, citizenship, and so on and so forth, that's one. The other thing, I think, is about the emergence of the role of private actors, the industries, you know, and some of you did talk about the private players. Again, that pits basically commercial interest versus public interest. Does it change priorities? And the costing issues, I think those are very, very important questions. And the third aspect is, I think this whole idea about the space law, and many of you mentioned about regulation, but also the ambiguities in the international space law about the definitions and whole range of things. So if you can just, maybe I'll open up the floor for a couple of questions, and then all of you can respond quickly. Yes, please.
Hi. My question would be, because you're all emerging space actors, and all of you, as far as I have noted down, have in some form or the other chosen to collaborate with other nations in order to jumpstart your endeavors. So Nigeria, Francis, your country has collaborated with the UK with SSTL, and the Philippines with Japan, and Brazil with China. And Taiwan, I think there was some collaboration projects, Formosat-2 with United States, and I think there was also some involvement in the Formosat-5 of other nations. And last but not least, Portugal as well mentioned the SSTL. So my question would be, how did you go into that process of selecting that partner that helps you on your way? Because that is a very important decision, and where to address such a partner, and what are the things, how to make such a decision, and what maybe are the lessons learned of the process that you have gone through?
First of all, I'd like to thank the whole panel for such a comprehensive analysis of emerging space actors. I have a couple of questions. My questions are basically to Francis and Rogel. Basically, you talked about multilateral and regional forums of dealing with issues related to space. So how do countries like Philippines and Nigeria tackle issues of agenda setting in these regional forums? Do countries like Nigeria and Philippines form coalitions to push forward their own agenda in terms of the space program? And the other question is related to whether there are synergies between the military establishment and the civilian establishment in making space program viable in an emerging country. And if that is the case, how far or how big in extent does the military establishment influence the research and development of a civilian program, space program? Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Rogel actually touched on something that we often see as a problem, which is garnering public support, particularly in emerging states. I think even India has received some criticism on why are you wasting money in space when you should be spending it here on Earth? A question for all of you in general is, how do you garner that public support? Do you go out looking for it, or do you oftentimes find that there's grassroots efforts from the people themselves who might support your space programs?
I don't think we are really running out of time. I'm sorry, so we can very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. My question to all the emerging space actors is how much of your space policy, the national space policy, considers the development of downstream actors so that they can utilize the infrastructure that you will be building as a result of the policy level decisions that you are taking. Because at the end of the day, it has to be whatever you put money on, there has to be a return on investment also on it from a national development point of view.
Okay. So can I request all the panelists to take about a minute to respond? Sure.
Okay, with Tom's questions first. I think for the Philippines, the case was about, well, because we have a very strong relationship with Japan even before, despite what happened in World War II. But so it was one of the most logical partners for us. But at the moment, we're also exploring other potential partners. I think the biggest lesson learned for us was that sometimes when engaging in North-South cooperation, the South countries are more at a disadvantage. So I think for emerging space nations, it has to be more careful. We had a good cooperation with Japan. APRCF is Japan-led, but at the same time, you have to look at what would be the best interest for your own country. I think that's and I think I forgot the question for. Okay, for the downstream side, in the space industry development roadmap, yeah, we right now we are actually more on the downstream segment, but we encourage a lot of participation coming from the private sector, so that's entrenched in our roadmap that private sector would definitely be involved in terms of space development. Might not be immediate in terms of the upstream side, but in downstream side, definitely they have to be part of it. That's why we're talking to a lot of startups and entrepreneurs in the Philippines who are interested in developing their own space products and services. And for Daniel's question, I think for the public, yes, it's a problem to get a public awareness and public support even. But it mainly stems from the lack of understanding on what can space do for the common citizen. And it has to be anchored with that mindset. It can't be anchored on, yes, we can have this technology, we can have this rocket, but at the end of the day, the question for the common citizen is, what benefit can we gain from it? So it can start by showing them that a lot of the technology that we enjoy today actually stemmed from space technology for space research in the past, and how it can be affect more tangible development or tangible aspect, like in the Philippines, in terms of disaster and security. And then from there, you work your way towards the science aspects. You cannot always start by showing the science. It has to be something more tangible and easily understood by the public. So for our case, it was not just about going online, showing all the websites and everything, but we even had to go to the point of going to radio stations, radio programs, newspaper, TV, everything. And as you do that along the way, you get more people to understand about space and what it can do, and they become your own evangelist so that they can do the work for you. So at some point, you just have to stand back and let everyone else do their own work.